Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my first video review. This is going to be for Paul Peterson's Smash Up, published by AEG. It is a shuffle building game for, I think, 2 to 4 players. Let's get into the box, see what's inside. The shuffle building game of total awesomeness, as it says on the box here. I'm not going to be doing a second take because my camera's almost dead. I might not even have time for this one review. Well, this is the rulebook. If you can hear, it is made of a nice, smooth, I don't really know what this material is called. Well, that's irrelevant. But it's a very concise rule book. It goes through everything nice and neatly and pretty much goes over almost every possibility. Goes through all of them quite nicely. And there's a lot of really great art here. The art in this game is fantastic. That's a big plus. Big plus, because the art in this game is amazing. Goes through all the stuff you need to know, but I will also be going through all the stuff you need to know. So, how do you do the setup to this game? Well, you have these 8 cards, assuming you have none of the expansions, which, why would you if you're watching this? And you take 2 of these decks for yourself. And you might be thinking, 2 decks for myself? Isn't that a bit gluttonous? Am I not taking more than I can chew? Well, these decks are 20 cards. They're designed to be going with each other. So you take your 2 decks, and your enemy, your opponent rather, not really your enemy per se, just who you're playing against, also takes 2 decks of their own. So I have the ninjas and the robots, and my opponent here has the aliens and the tricksters. And there are 8 different factions in this deck. There are, well, this box, and there's a 9th deck, which is the base deck, which we'll be going over in a second. So you take your 2 decks of cards, and you put them together, and you shuffle them to make your deck. That's all you do to make your deck. Deck building in 2 simple parts. Just pick one, and shuffle. So now I've got my deck. All I did was take 2s and shuffle them up. And for the second part, your opponent's going to be doing the same, obviously, taking their 2 decks and shuffling them up. For the second part of the setup, I'm going to have to move this box for a second. We take this base deck here that has these 4s, 2s, and 1s, and we shuffle them up. Same as you would with any card game, really. There's only a lot of shuffling during the setup. There's not much during the actual play. So you take these and lay out 1 for each player. So in a 3-player game, you'd have 2. No, in a 2-player game, you'd have 1, 2, and then you lay out an extra 1. So that's each player in the game plus 1. So this would be a 2-player game. These 3 right here. And the bases have different effects they can do on them. Like this one. When this base scores, each player gains 1 victory point for each minion that player has here. Now this is a good card to bring up because victory points are how you win the game. It's either the first person to 15 victory points wins, or, in the case of a 2 people going over 15, whoever has the highest wins. And if there's a tie, well, you keep going until somebody breaks the tie. And the way you get victory points is either these special conditions here, 1 victory point for each minion the player has here, so when this base is scored, which we'll talk about in a second, you get 1 victory point for every minion that's on the base. And you'll also understand what that means in a second. So this here would get you 3 victory points if you scored first on this base, 2 if you scored second, and 1 if you scored third. So you might be asking yourself, how do I score these bases? Well, these numbers here are how. It says 20 here, and if you look on one of these minions in the deck, there's these little numbers here that say 3. This invader says 3, and when I play it I get a victory point. These are the special conditions that minions and actions can do. So if I put this invader, I can choose to place this invader on any one of these 3 bases. So I can place it here. And now this base is at 3. And every single consecutive minion that's played there, so say my enemy here, my opponent, his fake opponent, takes this Ninja Acolyte card and places it on that base. Well, now this base is at 5. It's the cumulative total between you and your opponent that scores this base. So once a player keeps playing minion cards on a base until it hits 25, or in this case 24, then the base would score. And normally, the person with the higher number total, so between the 3 and the 2, if this was theoretically, if this was a 5 base, which there's none that's that low, but I have 3 and my opponent has 2, so I would get first place because I had the higher total, and I would get 4, and this would be on the base of second place, so they would get 2. Now, something that comes up quite a bit in 2-player games, especially if you're being sneaky, is if you have a base all by yourself over here, and I have one over by myself over here, and you score this one without me having a minion on it, you get those 3 points, and I get nothing. So you would get 3 points, and I get 0, because I had no minions on the base. You have to have a minion on the base to score it. So that's the gist of bases, and they all have different abilities, and they say what they do. And the way you take a turn, which is probably something I should have started with, but bear with me, I'm new here, is you start out with 5 cards in your hand, so you shuffle them up and you draw 5 cards off the top. 2, 3, 4, 5. And you take your hand of cards, and, well, this is all minions. Doesn't really show off what I want to show off well. Put that back. So you have minions and actions in your hand, and during your turn you can play 1 minion and 1 action. Now there are cards that let you do more than that, but those are exceptions. The general rule is 1 minion, 1 action on your turn. So I could play this scout and this invasion during my turn, but not this scout and this gremlin, unless I played an action that let me play an extra minion. You also could not do an invasion or another action unless you had a card that let you do that. So at the end of your turn, after you've played your minion and your action and any extra stuff you might have, you draw 2 cards at the end of your turn. So it's the end of my turn now. I've played my minion, and I've played my action, and I'm down to 3 cards, so I draw 2, because that's the end of my turn. This actually messed with me quite a little the first few times I played this game, because I'm so used to drawing at the start of a turn, but no, you draw 2 at the end of your turn. So that's the basic overview of how to play the game. You go, you take your minion in action, and then you draw 2, and your opponent goes and takes a minion in action and draws 2, and then it comes back to you, and you keep going back and forth, or in the case of a 3 or 4 player game, you go around the table until enough bases are scored to give a player 15 points. That's the gist of how to play it. I think I covered it up well enough. So now for opinions. Do I like this game? Yes. However, it's a little broken. There are certain combinations that are way better than any other. These factions do very specific things to... They're very thematic in what they do. Like, these alien cards will send cards back into people's hands like they're abducting things. These trickster cards are all about messing with your opponent because gnomes and goblins and such are famed creatures for messing with people. These ninja cards do very sneaky things that let you score very underhandedly, just like ninjas would do. Robots send out whole waves of stuff on one turn, and there are other factions I'll let you discover the rest on your own. But there are very certain combinations that are very, very dangerous. For instance, these robots happen to synergize well with several other decks, and can just completely dominate a game and can lead to a runaway leader depending on what you pick. So be very careful if you like finely tuned, heavily balanced games. Now sometimes there are ways to get around this if your opponent picks something that specifically counters what you have, so in some ways it's much better balanced than some other games. But zombie robots have yet to be stopped in this household, and nobody can figure out how to stop them yet. So that's all the how-to, and the fact that the game is a little broken sometimes doesn't really stop me from enjoying it. I still think it's very fun to play this game, and it's a very lightweight game. Well, not lightweight, it's medium weight. It's your family liked Catan, and you want to do something a little more complicated, but you don't want to show them, I don't know, Through the Ages or Twilight Imperium 3. You do this next, because it's a very post-gateway game. But there's one thing that is a little... This game is very mathy. It's very, very mathy, because every turn you're adding totals to see if you've got this thing in the corner, and you're having to keep track of these numbers and who got how many and what. And maybe you can do this with counters of your own, and I know the expansions come with counters, but if you're just getting the base game, it comes with no counters whatsoever, so you have to keep track of this yourself. So if somebody scores 4 and somebody scores 2, you yourself have to keep track of who has what. So there's a lot of bookkeeping. You might want to keep a pencil and paper around to play this game. I don't, but that's because I'm very good at storing basic numbers in my head. That's the gist of it. Very mathy game, very fun game, very thematic game, aside from the fact that the theme is really just mash everything together. That's Smash Up by Paul Peterson. I hope you enjoyed this video review. If I could have done anything better, let me know. If I could have done anything worse, I guess let me know.